Hey everyone, welcome to the Industry Show. I'm your host, Nitin Bajal, and joining me today is Aneri Shah. Aneri, welcome on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure is all ours. Okay. Let's start with who is Aneri?
Narrate is many different things. First of all, my name means unique. So I always think it's funny because when people ask my name, the most common response I get is, "Oh, that's so unique." So I like that it's so literal. It feels good. So I am a writer, director, and most newly also an actress, comedian. I act in stuff that I write.
That's awesome. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Let's talk about what is Lonely Girl, why that name, and give us a sense for the mission and the vision.
So Lonely Girl is it's actually two things that kind of fit together. So Lonely Girl is a project that I've been writing for about a year and a half, and it's a comedy pilot based on my own life. I spent 8 or 9 years in New York, and it's all of my 20s. And I wrote a show about four South Asian women in their early 30s in New York, based on based on me and my friend living in New York and us dating and working and living life. So it's like an insecure meets girl, but for South Asian women. And I decided to write that when I moved to LA a few years ago because I hadn't really seen anything on TV where it was about South Asian women just living and in a way that felt reflective of the experiences of me and my friends. And I just wanted it. I'm like, I don't know, that just feels revolutionary. And Issa Rae always talks about, Issa Rae is the writer, director, lead actress in The Cure. And she always talks about how making shows about Black women just doing mundane things like dating is actually revolutionary because not everything is about activism for me. So that's what the show Lonely Girl is about. And I also decided to act in it because the main character's journey is largely centered, at least the first episode, on her realizing that she also likes to date women in her 30s, which that wouldn't happen to me, like when it happened to me. That discovery happened in my 30s. And it was really jarring because of like, who am I? What have I been doing? How do I explore this as a millennial? I think, right, like the future generations, they have, especially in bigger cities, more permissivity around this. But when I was young, this was not talked about, especially if you were at Asian. Yeah, so the show is funny. I think it's quirky. We just produced a proof of concept for it. So I'm hoping to sell it to Netflix or Hulu or a big network. And then Lonely Girl, the media and entertainment brand I'm building, it's focused on, again, telling more stories about South Asian women and non-binary people just living and exploring all the different facets of that and what it means, starting with the South Asian diaspora. But I actually think it could be really interesting to create a bridge between South Asian diaspora women and then women back in India, because in so many ways, they've actually progressed far beyond what we're doing in representation because they're not thinking, oh, I'm so Indian, I'm so American. They're just living.
Yes.
And what I find many times is when I go to Mumbai and I meet women my age or like me, they've just progressed far beyond where I'm at and where me and my friends are at, which is always so funny. And a lot of it's also because my parents moved here in the 70s, 80s, but they're still stuck in that mindset.
In the time box.
They created a time box where women in India, especially in like Mumbai, they're talking about women's rights. They're talking about fertility. They're talking about sex. Like nothing is as big of a deal. Even in the show Lonely Girl that I wrote, we had one of the girls actually be from Mumbai because we thought it would be fun to play with that as a character, which I have not seen done. But yeah, Lonely Girl, the entertainment brand, it's just a company that covers all the different film, TV, digital, and unscripted and scripted projects we'll do in the future. I think we have a pretty strong mission. I'm figuring out what projects and products will fit under that vision.
That's awesome. And I think the big thing here is, as you mentioned, when it comes to certain minorities in within, whether it's South Asian or Black or any of these, it doesn't always have to be about something revolutionary. It doesn't have to be about activism or about or one person going against the grain of everything and becoming a success. It's, how did somebody get up and go about their day and in some cases find their identity? I come to that point and come of age where things like these have to be out there in the mainstream. So thank you for doing what you're doing. It's important, and more so as we become a more mainstream part of this country is of this community, we're only about 1.2%. When we look at economics, we're punching way above our weight class. So why not in entertainment? Why not in the day-to-day communication where we are still not being thought of as a stereotype? That you have to, if you're a South Asian, you have to be good at math. You have to be a genius in science. Simply don't have to be.
And just this pressure to feel like you always have to be successful in a very specific way. And for me, it felt very oppressive growing up. I was thinking about, okay, I always like to think about, okay, when we host an event, when Lonely Girl gets picked up, I'm like, what are things I want to ask about it? And every panel I go to, it's like, oh, tell me about your success story. And for some reason, I was just imagining a panel of South Asian people, and I was, what one time you failed and you didn't it didn't end well, like you didn't reframe it as a success, because those stories are important too. And I think our community in particular, we're highly overrepresented in fields like medicine and even in tech. There's so many South Asian CEOs, but yet the pressure to assimilate means we're never really thriving. We're still, despite having large monetary gain, still just surviving, which is like an interesting dichotomy.
It is, and it's more mental than anything, right? We come from that scarcity mindset, and going back to that game ball, we've also boxed ourselves into that thought process of there is not enough, and that's not true. And yeah, it's very interesting. So breaking that barrier, I think, is the more fundamental thing that will make us move, make the next generation have a better sense of clarity and be able to just live. That's extremely important. Okay. So you have this project coming up. And but before we talk about that, I want to ask you, what is the biggest challenge you're facing, despite all of these other things? What's the one big challenge you want to call out?
Fear. It's so interesting because I think about this question a lot, because I'm like, what are real challenges versus perceived challenges? But the biggest challenge I face day to day is literally fear. And I don't know, it's a lot of things. It's fear that, especially coming from before this, I'm working as a tech startup founder for 7 years, and then at bigger tech companies like Shutterstock before that. And so I think moving here and entering this space, it feels competitive. It feels unknown. Hollywood has been through a big upheaval in the last few years. So I think that unknown creates some big legitimate fear of what's going to happen. What is it all look like?
Is it the fear of success versus failure? Is this the fear of not being, that nobody gives a crap about everyday life of the X being a minority or someone who is looking to find their identity? And what is the fear about?
It's actually really specific. It's in my head. I feel, are people thinking, who does she think she is to create this? That's what's going through my head, even though there has been no evidence to show that this is true, because I'm actually really sincere and I work really hard. But I think coming from the tech world, it's like you work fast, you break things. But I'm coming here and there's many people that have been here a lot longer than me and working a lot longer than me in specific ways. And so my fear, I think, is sometimes people thinking my work is trite, or that who is she to be doing this?
That's a fundamental fear all entrepreneurs have, because we are going and doing something that has never been done before. And one part of us will always think, does nobody give a crap about this and that's why it's not being done? Or nobody just wanted to do it because they had other problems or other issues or whatever. So it's good to have that. Not in a restrictive way. To say, am I showing up and giving it my verdict of it?
And even 100%, right? There is such a thing as 10,000 hours. Like this is actually my second project. I worked on a film before this, and I'm seeing that everything I work on, things get better. It's the process, the quality, the types of people that want to work with me. It's slowly improving. But what's really interesting about art is that by the time you finish something, you already, at least for me, I keep looking at it thinking, here's all the things I could have done better. And so it's hard to have that perspective. But the other fear is so much of my work is based on my personal life. And so this fear is actually less than it used to be, but there's fear of how it will be received within my community. Luckily, now my parents also both know that I date women too. it's still just scary thinking about not just this project, but the fact that the thing I'm most passionate about is mining my personal life for stories and being relatable. That's just what I'm good at. It's what I like doing. There's such a perceived risk involved with that. And I don't really see very many South Asian women doing that. So in that way, I guess it's also the tone of the content is also an entrepreneurial endeavor in itself because it feels new.
The lady in me says, we won't have to go out, figure out something. This is just, if who I am, and I can write about me at the end of the day and keep producing more and more content.
That's the that is my approach. I'm like, but weird stuff happened. Okay. I went to this, oh, I'll talk about it. I went to this South Asian matchmaking convention last year. And this one guy was like, oh, so there's a lot of Gujarati people, which we know tends to be a slightly more conservative culture. And this guy was like, so we've been on 2 or 3 dates after the convention. And he goes, so how do I explain to my parents that you're bisexual? I was like, what do you mean? I was like, okay, so you've already decided they're not going to like it. You've taken that upon yourself.
Yeah.
And now somehow it's my problem. I was like, I don't understand. Never call me again. Like, it was a good filter. And I didn't say that. Way too nice about it, actually. It's more that when I thought about it after, I was like, wow, this is interesting that this is going to now come up because it's more public facing. It's like, pretty funny.
So you have a better response to the next person who says that?
I don't know. Help me think of one. What do you think? I think in our community, even in my generation, many of us are still working through this idea that we feel like we owe our parents something for coming to this country and sacrificing so much. And I understand that. You can have gratitude for your parents, but what's been really interesting with me and my parents is I think in many ways they've had the privilege of being able to evolve with me because I'm so open. So it's not always easy, but it's actually definitely more fruitful. And that's something they told me. That's been an interesting development for me. And also creating an identity that's just separate from your parents. In the show, so much of it is about that. And you would be surprised how many people who've watched some of the content or who have read the script have said, how come you don't have their parents as part of it? You should have their parents. I'm like, not all of our experiences have to be defined by our parents.
It's different for people to think about it in that way. But that's how we've been ingrained that our identity comes from and is attached to and rooted in what our parents are.
Yeah.
Typically. Now, on the flip side of challenges come opportunity. What's the one you're most excited about?
And you asked me about this as a challenge, but I actually see this as an opportunity. I'm very convinced that over the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, that we're going to see an explosion in South Asian content generally, just because the population is quite large. And you look at, in the US, it's still only 1.2%, but I think the buying power is in the trillions.
Yeah.
It's very high, and it's a highly educated population. And then more generally speaking, almost 25% of the world is South Asian. But South Asian women's on-screen representation time is just 0.3%. What I actually think about more often than the challenge, do people even care about this, is actually the opposite of can I get there fast enough? Because I think it's going to happen. And so I just want to make sure that I stay cutting edge enough and relevant enough to stay at the helm of it. I'm really excited about that. I think the deeper we're willing to dive into ourselves, especially women who in our culture who tend to be more like, I don't want to say this about myself. I don't want people to think this. I think the more we can delve into our actual complexity, it's going to be so interesting because the South Asian woman's experience in the US is so different it's very different. We're like fetishized by the American community and then treated it like we should be chaste or whatever by our own community. We're expected to serve the elders in our community, but then in the workplace where we're succeeding, that's seen as a weakness. And I don't know, people hate us sometimes in our own family. That's like a weird, and I don't know what it happened. Yeah.
It is
Weird.
Yes. I'm with you. The more a box is unopened, the more it had inside of it actually come out. And to me, that's the biggest opportunity. And you're right, from an economic perspective, yes, there is huge opportunity. But also at the other end is this is completely unexplored, even in India. Something that's just about coming out in a way that sort of starting to accept, starting to talk about this and put it out on the screen. Right place, right time. So
Yeah.
keep going.
Exactly. That's been my favorite phrase. Whenever somebody says keep going, I take it as a sign of, okay, just do one thing today. And one of my mentors wrote a book called Doing It Scared, which I really like, because her thing is a lot of times people will wait until they're not scared anymore to do something. But that's not a real thing. Most people who are doing things, they're scared every day. And yeah, for the proof of concept, I've been putting off hosting a roundtable for feedback with all the different people that have been following it, because I'm just scared. I'm watching it. I'm like, is this even good? I don't know. Maybe it's good. But the point isn't, is this perfect or not? The point is just keep going. And people follow that. And it takes, when you're doing something that feels so new, it's not going to be perfect, because you can't imitate what someone else has done, because it doesn't exist. And so that's something I have to keep reminding myself in my meditation every day. I'm like, it's okay, just keep going.
And drawing from the startup world, especially in the tech side, because you come from that world, is one thing I personally believe in is, if you wait for the product to be perfect, you waited too long. Just put it out there, take the feedback, keep improving.
Yeah. Built in public.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you have to be, and then I think developing a spiritual practice where you don't take feedback too personally. That's something I'm working on now, because honestly with tech, if I built a product and then users didn't like it or whatever, I never took it personally.
But this content also comes from you.
It's so different. Like, we built products for marketers to make video. That was a very different feeling. And sometimes I have days where I'm like, oh man, that was nice. It was a lot easier. And some ways it was a lot easier.
Now, as we look forward, I want to take a moment and look back in the rearview mirror. Talk about two instances. One where things did not work out as you had expected. There was some failure, some lesson that came out of it. And on the other end, where things, well, this particular experience became a success beyond your imagination.
Yeah. So in terms of failure, it was not one, I guess it was one inciting incident that led to a series. What I now look at is, I don't want to say failure, but maybe redirection, rejection, pivot. But I was building a startup called Siteworthy that actually still exists. We were building products and network of video editors to help brands and agencies repurpose their existing content into short form ads for TikTok and for Instagram and for social. A couple of years into that business, we got funding from a big agency, RVA. And then maybe a year after that, I was raising money from venture capitalists, and I was doing a seed round. That's like the first round for funding that you get for your startup. And it took a few months to get a couple investors on board. And then we had what was called a lead investor that would take a larger share of the equity and set the terms for the round. And there was one guy in particular that he was actually from India, and he was the one I was in touch with most of the time about our finances and that kind of thing. And then they finally agreed to come on, and then we had a whole round set up based on those two guys, him and his fund manager, being on our board. And maybe 2 or 3 days before they were supposed to wire the money, they could be from India, sent me the long text, basically implying that he expects to date me. Yeah, after, and I like, I'm like, who would text that? Why would you? I read it, and I was shocked. And I was also like younger. I was less seasoned and also really nervous about how things would play out. I think I would handle it very differently now. But it took me a couple days to report it, and then I did, and he got let go. But what was challenging was that then that fund decided to pull out of the round. So then we lost our other investors, which I don't think we had to. I think I just didn't have the emotional capacity in that moment to explain and tell the story. And everyone, we should do press. And I was like, I don't want to do press. We flubbed. And my co-founder at the time was 7 or 8 months pregnant. I remember we had to have some hard conversations that she needed money. And she was a single mom. So I was like, okay, you don't have to work on it, isn't it? It's okay. You should probably go somewhere where you can make more money and I was like, I don't think it's helping me to have somebody who is both pregnant and needs more money from the business than we can give. I would say that I had been working on such a high energy path for so many years that when that happened, I didn't have any reserves. So I completely burned out. And so I was in my mistake. Obviously, I can't control that the guy did this. But I learned from that experience that one, if you are working on high for a long time, then when something does happen, the burnout is not 3 months. It was like a year and a half, 2 years maybe. And I was able to rebuild the business, make it profitable. I just made it into an agency. I cut off the tech. It was fine. But I feel like my personal life really suffered. And I don't see it as a failure anymore. But at the time, the ways in which I felt like I had failed were just, I just sleep all the time. I'm like, oh, I'm just totally burnt out. I've hit a wall. And now looking back, I'm like, I just had no reserve. I had no cushion for this drive because I was working all the time.
Yeah. In the moment, it may seem like a failure because those are the metrics you're. Did I get the funding? Did I increase the customer base, revenue, etc.? But yeah, especially when you're running on fuel.
Yeah. I literally remember thinking like, I can't do it. I don't know what to do, but I can't do it. And I think I got lucky in many ways because I don't think that was the business I wanted to be running for 10 years. So now looking back, I'm like, thank God that didn't work out. I would still be working on it because we would have raised more money and then who knows what would have happened. And in many ways, I think also I learned and thought a lot more deeply about what I needed a business partner and maybe conversations I should have pushed harder for us to have. I didn't think about it at the time because nobody teaches you how to do that stuff. And most businesses shut down. I was reading about this the other day. 40% of businesses that shut down is actually due to the co-founder relationship. I was like, oh, that makes sense. And you should treat it like a marriage. You should go to therapy. You should have conversations every week. So that's something I also learned from that is if I were to ever have a business partner again, I would not just treat it. I would treat it with as much seriousness as I treat a serious romantic relationship.
That's perfect. And I think we talk about this a lot. It's not really failure because you learn something from it. You're better, you're wiser, and you're not committing the same mistake again. You came out ahead.
And thank God, and look, I think I still made money then. And like, you know what, relatively speaking, at least I made some of those mistakes or those things happened early on. And now that's done.
They're smaller, they're cheaper.
Like in the rear view, it seemed like, oh, at the time it felt so big.
Yeah.
But now it feels medium or necessary or just part of it. And then you said, what's something that that I thought succeeded beyond my wildest dream? I did for that company when we got funding from RDA. That was a really fun experience because they brought us into their venture arm and then they would introduce us to all their brands to sell our products. And I remember one of the biggest sales I made that I was really excited by because I beat all the guys in my cohort was a Princess Cruise. I was really excited because everybody picked them because everybody wants to work with Carnival Cruise, right? They're huge. And I remember when I won the pitch, one of the directors at RGA being like, you're going to be famous today. And I was like, thank you. And I got lucky. Their chief digital officer at the time was Asian. So I don't think it was a coincidence. And it was also a reminder that when you have more people like you sitting in the seat of power, they want to give you that power too. The second one was my first film happened by accident, but I'm really proud of how it turned out. I was living in New York when the pandemic started, and I had a cousin on the front line working as an ER physician in Brooklyn. And she was 2 days back from maternity leave when like the lockdown started and everything went crazy. And then her boss had emailed her telling her, you have to make a will and get your affairs in order. So she called me panicking. I'm like, God, what am I going to do? And she's like, can I work you in my will in case nothing happens to me and my husband? It was a really scary moment. And I started recording our conversations thinking, I don't know what this is, but I'll start recording. And then one thing led to another. And all these other women physicians started reaching out to me in New York. And I ended up making a 50-minute documentary called I'm Doing My Job, where we followed 6 South Asian and Black female ER physicians throughout the pandemic. And I didn't know like what the movie was or what I was even doing. I thought the pandemic was going to be 2-3 months. But I'm really proud because we were able to get funding for it through GoFundMe and then also an executive producer in Brooklyn. And we finished the film in 2022, like November, December. And then in 22-23 did the film festival circuit. And I'm really proud we finished it, honestly. I don't know exactly where it will be released, but I remember thinking like, oh, this ended up being such a cooler experience than I thought it would be. And I also think that's when I realized I like telling South Asian women stories.
That's also good. Then just going through that experience, what came about what the end product is and how it shaped them. Yeah. Knowing you can do something and put something like that together, having that vision, going through the whole film.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And in 2020, when I started making it, I got so much pushback around why does it have to be all South Asian and Black women or what? Like, first of all, South Asian women are extraordinarily overrepresented in medicine.
Yeah.
So why would it be weird? And I'm like, this isn't about COVID. This is about the women. And we'll be able to go much deeper. That was my vision. We'll be able to go so much deeper if from a similar immigrant culture about the challenges they face. But I thought a lot about if it was all white women, would anybody have pushed back? I was like, no. It would have been like, oh, this is such a feminist film.
Yeah.
The more people pushed back, the more I wanted to make it about that. And a lot of South Asian people pushed back. We hate ourselves.
We do. We talked about the yeah, because we came out in Fortune. We ended up getting calls and messages about why are we writing about this? Like, why not? This is the fact. Like, we are out there any multiple Fortune 100 companies. Why would we not write about it? So yeah, we do hit on.
It's such a and we're very critical. And I think so much of my theory is that the less you create, the more you criticize. And our community is not, at least in the US, is not creating to its full potential, right? Like we come from such a creative background in South Asia, but then a lot of people come here and you lose all of that. Like I grew up doing Bharatanatyam and playing harmonium and doing all these things. If I wasn't writing and performing now, I feel like all of that stuff would just be in me, and it creates, I think, anger. I think that's why we criticize so much.
You not to. Yeah.
Okay.
Talking about criticism, what do you do for fun?
Oh, that's a good question. I do a lot. I have a lot of fun because I have to. I live really close to the beach in LA. I live in Santa Monica, so I like playing beach tennis, and I like just jumping in the water and going to the beach in the morning and reading a book. One of my favorite things to do. There's a bookstore near me called Zibby's Bookstore. I love bookstores. So I go in there. When I go on a run up Montana, every time I go up, on the way back, I get a sea salt cold brew, and then I go into the Zibby's Bookstore and I get a book.
Yeah.
So it's a very expensive run every time I go up Montana. But yes, I like bookstores. I really like comedy shows and shows. And anything my friends are doing creatively, I like supporting them. I think it's really fun. So I have friends that are doing one-woman shows or also producing film. Like LA's a very creative place. One of my fun things to do is just going to their stuff and
Supporting.
supporting them. And then I think, yeah, I said running. And then one of my friends just opened up a dance studio in Marina Del Rey. So twice a month they do Bharatanatyam classes. So sometimes I go to that.
If you're active. Great. Now on to my favorite part of the show, which we call the one-line life lesson. Would love for you to share your life lessons with us.
Oh my God. I don't know if but I don't know. I've been thinking a lot lately about how we often we think we're supposed to avoid difficulty. If something feels difficult or painful, we try to avoid that feeling. And the only way out is through. I feel like the biggest skill I've gained throughout being an entrepreneur for so many years is the ability to navigate change and difficulty and not see it as so scary, but just see it as an opportunity to become an even better, brighter, more playful version of myself. And so now that I've completely unleashed my inner child, I play every week, I like whatever. I'm like, I'm going to be okay. No matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. And especially for people in the South Asian community, I want them to have that. Just like the ability to know they're always going to be okay. But maybe there's a lesson around playfulness. I didn't throw it in the one line because I'm not good at doing that. I'm not a writer. I'm just kidding. I'm a writer, but I'm still not good at doing that. I don't know. Maybe my lesson is play every day.
Important one.
Yeah.
Right. Not being inhibited by these cultural norms or boxes that have been created for us that you have to fit this XYZ stereotype or expectation. Just grow up and do what feels right for you.
And the other one, someone said this to me at one of our events, or when I was making the documentary, it was interesting because we had to go through so many pages of transcript to figure out what audio to include. And some of it was some of the South Asian women were talking a little bit about how they felt like during the pandemic, even though they were on the front line, they're like, even though we have doctors in our family that are not even seeing COVID patients, because people in our culture respect men more, they're still only talking to them. And that line, I went back and forth so many times on whether or not to include it because the line was talking about someone that I actually know. And I was like, I don't know if this is going to hurt someone. And someone said to me, instead of thinking about who you're going to hurt, think about who you'll inspire. And that I think about that line all the time because I think it made me think a lot about my legacy and about the younger generations. And I was like, oh my gosh, it doesn't matter what the people who came before me think of me. It's actually much more important what the people that are coming from us are able to take away from us because that's the future. And so I think about that line a lot whenever I'm spiraling back into that feeling or space of, I don't want to hurt anybody because I find that even South Asian creatives that I've met and published things, who've written things, they censor themselves.
Yeah.
I'm trying to commit to not doing that.
What other lessons do you have?
Oh my God. Oh, move your body.
And you?
I don't know. I know you get it. I didn't work out at all during the pandemic or maybe the 1 or 2 years prior. I was in like a relationship I wasn't super happy in. And I think that it all played together. And in my head, it wasn't affecting me that much. I didn't know. And then after I went through my breakup, I started eating a little bit. I spent 3 months. I stopped drinking alcohol for those 3 months and I started just eating more protein, less carb, and made like some simple changes. That was a year and a half ago. Within a year, I had lost like 30 pounds. I'm 5'2". And forget the weight. I look 5 to 7 years younger than I did 5 years ago. And I truly believe it's just the reduction of cortisol, the meditation, like the moving my body. And it started small. I started with just taking walks twice a day and then slowly added running in. And then just 3 months ago, I started doing a little bit more strength training. But yeah, after 4 years of not working out, I couldn't. Everyone thinks they have to start extreme. And like, I started with doing a 20-minute walk every day because I'm not moving at all. And I think that moving my body has been the single most helpful thing for my professional life outside of everything else.
And you're right. You don't want to take off on a plane only to fall off and or injure yourself.
Like I couldn't even imagine, like even going on a walk every day felt like a big deal. So that was a really interesting, it's interesting how much that changed my life. And I did it in a sustainable way because I started small, but even that part of it, go incrementally. You don't have to do everything.
And that's a big realization because, yeah, people do think I have to do this with a bang because it has to be announced to the rest of the world, not understanding that keeping up to something that's extremely high or different, very different from what your today looks like, is not sustainable.
My last one would be, I have one more, is a lot of times in every industry, tech and entertainment, my experience, people talk a lot about networking. My advice is always prioritize connection and building relationships over networking because sometimes that word, networking is good, but treating relationships like they're transactional, I think is helpful in the short term, but actually really harmful in the long term. Whereas connections and relationships will always pay off. And I think we sometimes forget that. And I just, number one cause of death outside of anything else, I think is loneliness. And so outside of everything else, I think the connections we have are all we have.
A lot of wisdom.
Oh yeah, and Lonely Girl, I never talked about it. I was the loneliest I ever was when I was in a bad relationship with myself and with the wrong partner. And now that I'm living alone, but I know myself better and I'm prioritizing connection, I have so much life. And so I wanted to create a sardonic take on the word lonely because being lonely is not about being alone. It's about feeling misunderstood or not being seen. And so I wanted to play with that word because I think it's such an interesting word. And I think our conception of it is off.
And it plays well into your name, not being unique.
That's true. And being an Aquarius.
Yeah.
We fly alone.
Awesome. Thank you so much for making the time to share your journey, story, and your life lessons. Congrats again on the appointment.
Thank you.
I'm personally rooting for you all the Amazons and Netflixes and go on a competitive bid.
Not true. Again,
We have to.
we have to.
Mhm.
If we don't root for ourselves, who will?
Exactly. Thanks again.
Thank you for having
And
me.
then looking forward to bringing you back on after the bidding war is done to talk about how that going, what goes on in that mix of things. So, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.